Things you hate when you're an INTP. Everything. Thought I'd beat you all to it. Simplistic explanations. INTPs often find themselves situated between two equally undesirable extremes. On one side, there's the narrow-minded, dumbed-down explanations and easy narratives. But on the other side, there's the overly complicated theorizing, the very dense, inaccessible stuff. Think of academic papers, or maybe academia in general. You might think, but wait, I thought that INTPs were firmly in the latter category. Well, sometimes, but it's not always the case. They like to have as much clarity of thought as possible. As Einstein said, everything should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. Finding that intellectual sweet spot is something that often preoccupies INTPs. But more often than not, they're going to be on the side of pointing out that things are more complex and require more nuance. For INTPs, being lazy is fine, but being a lazy thinker is kind of a deal breaker. Not knowing the answer. I don't mean simply lacking knowledge in a particular area, but situations where there's some kind of unresolved mystery or puzzle that you really want to know the answer to, but for some reason is just out of reach. Let me give you an example of an insatiable desire to know the answer that popped up in my life recently. Let's call it the mystery of the doors. About 2 months ago, something very strange happened in our house. Some of the doors, 3 of them, suddenly wouldn't close. And this wasn't a slight issue. The doors had moved to the point where they were way off being closable. Instead of closing perfectly into the frame of the door, they were kind of hanging down and simply banging into the side of the wall. And this drove me nuts because there was absolutely no explanation. Plus, the bathroom door was one of the doors that wouldn't close. Now, call me old-fashioned, but personally, I like to shower in a non-exhibitionist way. I've noticed that for INTPs, when there is something that sparks their curiosity, but at the same time is unresolved, it's like a thorn in their side, or a thorn in their brain. If you have a thorn in your brain, then firstly, well done, because that's quite impressive. And secondly, maybe see a doctor. So the first theory was that these doors, which are wooden, expanded during some warm weather that we had. Now, that's quite a common thing to happen, and that seemed plausible at first. But then I started to wonder, why would it affect some doors and not others, since the doors that were affected didn't seem to be in any kind of warmer location. Plus, the weather, from what I remembered, wasn't mind-blowingly hot. So this churned around in my brain for a while. Then I started to look for correlations in the hope that some causation was lurking in there too. What else was happening at that time that was unusual? Because if 2 unusual things happen at the same time, and there's something of a mysterious origin or cause, there's a decent chance they could be related. Then I remembered that we'd been having a lot of building work done out the front garden, during which there was lots of drilling into the ground. Then it clearly came back to me that during this drilling, the entire house was actually shaking, most likely leading to the screws in the hinges of the doors getting looser as a result. And in fact, the doors had dropped in a way that made it look like the hinges had loosened. As for why it affected certain doors and not others, it could simply be the case that those were the doors that started off with the looser screws to begin with. Now, whether that's the correct explanation or not, it makes just about enough sense for me to be happy with it. But that feeling of not knowing, when it should kind of be obvious, drives INTPs insane. You'll be happy to know that the doors are now fixed and I can shower again in privacy. Well, unless you want to pay me. Feel free to send me an email. Misinformation or miscommunications. This follows on from and relates a lot to the last point. Anyone that is intentionally or unintentionally obscuring the truth and preventing people from getting to the bottom of things is going to be seriously disliked by INTPs. Misinformation for INTPs is like when some everyday kitchen appliance breaks. It's something that should just work and shouldn't be a problem. Drawing insights and conclusions from accurate data is hard enough without people muddying the water, especially when it's for ideological or political or just self-serving reasons. There's something from the INTP's perspective that is fundamentally unprincipled about that. I would imagine, based on that 2020 has been a bit of a bad year for INTPs when it comes to watching or reading the news. Watching people assert things with such confidence during clearly uncertain times, again, just kind of annoying. So it occurred to me when doing this series that for certain types, I might need to revisit them and the amount of things they hate. I decided to ask the INTP army on our Discord server, which I highly recommend checking out, the link is below, and they give me some very interesting points which I'll read out. Having too many interests. This can be a real painful one for INTPs. It's not because having many interests is inherently a bad thing. It's more that the possibility to be good in those areas is actually quite high. But then the interests and hobbies and curiosities and rabbit holes start piling up on top of each other to the point where you have this huge potential energy, but not much to show for it. Potential and trying to manifest even a small percentage of it in the world is a constant source of pain for INTPs. It's like having really good predicted grades, but never turning up for the exam. The exam being life in this metaphor. Willful ignorance. I think that contrary to the sometimes arrogant way people with a scientific mindset are perceived, to be truly scientific in your approach to life involves a great deal of humility, being aware of how much you don't know and sometimes can't know. I think a quick way to gain the respect of an INTP is to be upfront about not knowing something, whether that's in front of people in a workplace, a classroom, or just a one-on-one conversation. Pretending to know something, or on the flip side, being willfully ignorant of things, yeah. Not good. Not being able to articulate and convey your thoughts properly. I think this is more a reflection of the complexity of the thoughts than a lack of eloquence. In fact, I don't think that eloquence is the issue at all. It's more about organizing the thoughts in a way that is digestible and linear to other people. INTPs' brains can sometimes work in a very non-linear way. As I've said before on a number of occasions, that's why the written word is so good for types like INTPs, where they can organize and structure their thoughts in a kind of step-by-step way. Okay, let me stop with all the hate and give peace a chance. The vast majority of people who watch this video are non-subscribers. It's around 2/3. Since I went through all the effort of wearing a robe and this top that I bought like 15 years ago in Disneyland, which is still, for some reason, too big for me, I think that deserves one click on the subscribe button. If you're in the mood for it as well, there's lots of individual social media links below, including an Instagram, a blog, etc. And finally, if you think there's a slight chance that I might have missed a few thousand things, leave some comments down below to enlighten me.